everyone, it's Rachel from Desert Blossom Crafts back with another stitch tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet the jasmine stitch. This is such a beautiful stitch that looks like jasmine flowers, and while some people say it is the hardest crochet stitch, I beg to differ. It is a little bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's a repeat that you just keep going over and over again with, and in my opinion, it is well worth the effort. So I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks you need to get started with this stitch. Now you probably noticed I have two versions of this stitch going on right now, and I wanted to start out by showing them to you because there's some differences between them. So I had a little trouble when I was first learning this stitch with getting the flowers to not have holes in the center. So you can see this one's a little bit looser. I can easily stick my finger through the center of the flowers, which might be fine for some people, but I knew the classic way this stitch looked really just had a closed surface, and you can kind of start to stick your finger through, but not so much with this one. It's a lot tighter. There's no holes in the middle of the flowers. So there's a few things that I found really helped when it comes to this. It took me a few tries to figure it out, so I'll save you the trouble. With this stitch, well, with both of these I used worsted weight yarns. And this one, I used a larger hook. So I think I used H or I, so pretty standard hook for worsted weight yarn. But this one, I used this hook, which is just a 3mm, so pretty close to an F size hook with still worsted weight yarn. And so you can see that going down the hook size really makes all the difference. So if you're a tight crocheter to begin with, you might not find you need to go down that far, but I think I tend to be a little bit looser, and so I definitely needed to go way down in order to get this to look like the standard jasmine stitch without holes. Now there's actually one more thing that I did to get this one to close, because even with this, I still had some little holes that were showing up, but that is something I'm going to show you as we get into the stitch, so just keep watching. This will be towards the middle or end of the tutorial, and I'll show you that other little trick. But for now, let's get started with the base row of foundation puff stitches. So as far as yarn goes, I am going to be using just Red Heart Super Saver for this tutorial, but there are some things to keep in mind when choosing a yarn with the jasmine stitch. For example, this yarn is a little bit fluffier, it has more of like a halo to it, and the jasmine stitch does look really nice in yarns like this. It just makes the puff stitches really pretty. It gives them a different feel, I guess. When you get into like something like Red Heart Super Saver, it gives them a little bit more stitch definition. So you can go for whatever look you'd like. You can experiment with different yarns. I think it would look great in a lot of different yarns, but I am going to be using Red Heart Super Saver. I do recommend starting with a worsted weight, and then you can experiment with that hook size as well, but I'm going to be using the 3mm. So to get started with this stitch, we're going to make what's called a row of foundation puff stitches. So this stitch does not start in the traditional way. It does not start with a chain stitch. We're going to start by making puff stitches in a row. And you'll see what I mean as I get started. So I'm going to make my slip knot, insert my hook, and chain 2 to begin. 1, 2. Now we're going to make our first foundation puff stitch. So I'm going to start by lengthening this loop on my hook a little bit. We're going to be doing that a lot with lots of different loops, and we're going to want to try to get a pretty standard loop size, like keeping it the same. So whatever size you make your loops, you want to try to keep them even. And we'll get into that more in the future. So for now, just lengthen this a little bit and then yarn over, and then we're going to insert our hook into the first chain and pull up a loop to the same height. So now we have 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and do that again, and yarn over and do it one last time. So at this point we'll have 7 loops on our hook. You can always count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I missed one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There we go. And now I'm going to yarn over. Now this is one of the most unique things about the jasmine stitch, and one of the trickier things. We're going to hold back this section of our last yarn over. So generally, you know, you just yarn over and pull through for a puff stitch. But we're going to actually pinch the yarn at the base of our stitch before yarning over. And because we're going to do something into that loop. So I'm going to pull through the stitch, all of those 7 loops. And then I'm going to insert my hook into that loop I held and make a single crochet. And that is one foundation puff stitch. We're going to chain 1. So from here on out we're mostly going to be chaining 1. The 2 chains is just to get us started, because now we have 1 chain and then we're going to work into the single crochet for our next puff stitch. So I'm going to lengthen my loop again to about the same length as before, yarn over, and insert right here, let me get close, right here beneath the single crochet we just made. Pull up, yarn over, pull up, and one last time, yarn over, pull up. So we're going to always insert our hook 3 times into whatever space we're going in. And that will always make us end up with 7 loops plus 8 for the yarn over. So now remember, grab your yarn right at the base of the stitch, yarn over and keep holding on to that, pull through, and now here's that strand you were holding, insert and make a single crochet, and chain 1. So there we have 2 foundation puff stitches. So you're just going to keep making these until you get the width you want to practice the jasmine stitch. I do recommend starting with at least around 6 or so. That will give you a good amount of room to practice the jasmine stitch on the next rows. So I'll show you this one more time. Lengthen your loop, yarn over, insert into that single crochet right here, pull up, and I like to put my thumb on the loops as I do all of this because it helps lock them in place. So every time I yarn over, I grab it, then I keep my thumb on those loops as I pull up, and then I add that to what I'm grabbing, and then I do it one more time. And this tends to keep them at an even length. Now I'm holding back this, yarning over, pulling through, and single crocheting into this loop. Chain 1. Alright, so repeat that until you have the width of your piece. I'm going to do 5 or 6, we'll see. Alright, so here I have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 foundation puff stitches, and once you get that, we're going to do one more foundation puff stitch the exact same way, but it's going to be like our turning chain almost. So let me show you what I mean. We're just going to make the foundation puff as usual. 2, 3, pull through, and single crochet. But we're just going to kind of use our fingers to turn it. So now we're going to work across all of these puff stitches with the jasmine stitch. So the jasmine stitch is going to be similar to this puff stitch, but also different. Let me just describe it to you before we get started. We're going to make basically 3 unfinished puff stitches. So we're going to make 1 into the top of this puff stitch, 1 into the bottom of the puff stitch, and 1 into the next puff stitch. And we're going to pull up 8 loops in each of those spaces, and then we're going to draw through all 24 loops. And I know that sounds a little bit scary, and that's one of the reasons why the jasmine stitch is considered a hard stitch. But once you get used to it, you really just get in the hang of it. So start by chaining 1, lengthen your loop, yarn over, and we're going, so here's our turning puff stitch, we're going in the single crochet that we literally just made. So right under here. 1, 2, 3. Now after you do those 3 where you insert your hook, yarn over again, and that's going to be like your first unfinished puff stitch. So now if we look at where we are here, here's our turning one. So we're going to go in the base of our turning puff stitch. So right down here. So here's our first loop, yarn over, insert a second time, yarn over, insert a third time. So as you can see, now I have 2 of these unfinished on my hook. I'm going to make sure and yarn over, so now I'll have a total of 16 loops, and it's hard to count them, but as long as you're going 3 times into each juncture and then yarning over at the end, you will have the right amount. And I actually do like doing the jasmine stitch on an ergonomic hook, because when I used just a regular steel hook, the puff, all the loops do tend to like start sliding back. This kind of locks them in place, which is kind of nice. Anyway, so I'm going to do this one more time. So here's where I just did it. I'm going to do it now in this next juncture right here. Insert, pull up for the first time, 2, 3, and now I have all 24 loops here. And they are really squished together because of the ergonomic hook. Once again, you may find that you don't like that, but it's worth experimenting with because I do like it. Now we're going to yarn over and pull through all of these loops, but you need to hold back this strand again, just like we did with the other ones, where we're holding it at the base and then pulling through. So this is probably the trickiest part. As you start, you want to just go slow. I usually try to go through some of them, pull it out, go through some more, and now I just have the last thing here. So there I've pulled through 1, 2, 3 unfinished puff stitches. We're finishing them into a jasmine stitch. And here's that loop that I held back. I'm going to go into it. Now, this is the point where I said I have another tip for you as far as making sure that the centers of the flowers are closed. A lot of tutorials will say to do a single crochet here, just like before, where you yarn over and complete the single crochet like this, but I find that leaves a big hole. So instead of doing that, you can just slip stitch, and it will make the hole a lot less noticeable and a lot tighter. So you can experiment with that if you want. If you like a little bit of a hole, you can do the single crochet. If your tension is tight already, you might not need to do the slip stitch, but that's just a thought for you. I have found that really helpful. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do for the rest of this tutorial. Next, I'm going to chain 1, and from here on out, we're just going to make these jasmine stitches across the row. So now that we've done the first one, it's going to be, let me show you where we're going to go. We're going to go first in the slip stitch we just made, so the center of that jasmine. Then we're going to go at the base juncture of the one on the left, so right here, and then we're going to go in the next puff stitch again. So I'm going to pull out my loop, make my first puff right here, and again I'm just holding these loops with my thumb to make sure they stay the same length. So this is super important. Your jasmine stitch will look much neater if you can keep your loops the same height. So there I've inserted and pulled up 3 times, and then I'm yarning over. Now I'm going in the base right here. 1, 2, 3, yarn over, and now I'm going right here. 1, 2, 3. Now grab the base of your working yarn, yarn over, and start to pull through. Now as you get better at this, you may try going through them all at once, but what can sometimes happen is your hook can catch on portions of the loops, and then the loop that comes out is a little bit has some extra strands caught. So that's why I like to do one at a time, especially at the beginning. Now I'm just going in that strand I caught, yarning over and closing it up with a slip stitch. So you can see the jasmines are starting to form. Once we do row 2, they'll really start to have all 5 petals and look really pretty. So that's what you're just going to keep repeating. The next one would be right here, and right here. So I'll meet you back when we get to just having one left because the ending can be a little bit tricky. So I went ahead and did 2 more jasmine stitches right here and right here. Now this is what it'll look like when you get close to the end, and you might think you've run out of spaces to go into, but you haven't. From here we're going to chain 1 and do our last jasmine stitch. We're going to go into the top as usual, into this juncture at the bottom, and then we're just going to find a place to go at the very end. So I've lengthened my loop. I'm going in the eye of the last jasmine. 1, 2, 3, yarn over the base of this one. 1, 2, 3, yarn over, and now this last one, you just want to find a space to insert it really. It's not like there's a specific place, you just kind of want to find where that chain is. So I'm just going to go right in here. Pull up, so that's where I'm at. 1, 2, and 3. And now I'm doing this one last time where I hold the yarn, pull through. So here I've just pulled through about half of them, then I'm going to pull through the rest, and here's my little loop and slip stitch. And that is your very first row of jasmine stitches. From here on out, I promise it will get easier because you already know the main things that you need to do. So for row 2, you're going to turn your work and chain 1. And before we start doing jasmine stitches again, we're going to do one starting foundation puff stitch again, and this is going to be like our turning chain again. So I'm just going to lengthen my loop, and I'm going to go into the eye of the first jasmine and make a single foundation puff stitch. So I'm just doing it like usual, 3 times in, but then instead of keeping on going with the jasmine, I'm just going to hold back this strand, pull through, and single crochet into that loop. So the important thing here is I do the slip stitches on all the jasmine stitches, but I do single crochets still on all the foundation puff stitches. And that's because the foundation puff stitches aren't closing the center of any jasmine, so they don't need to have the slip stitch. The slip stitches help close the centers. So now that we have our little turning puff stitch, we're going to start with the jasmine stitch again. So we're just going to start our jasmine by going in here, then in here, and then right here. So let me show you that. So I've pulled up my, actually I need to chain 1 first. Chain 1, pull up my loop, yarn over, and go into the single crochet that you just did. There, I pull up my loop, 1, 2, 3. Now I've started my jasmine. I'm going to yarn over and go right here. So hold back those loops with your thumb, go under, pull up, 1, 2, 3. Yarn over, and now into the next center. So now it's really going to start forming the petals, which is cool. 1, 2, and 3. So now I've got all those 24 loops, 1, 2, 3 different puff stitches that we're making into one. And then I'm holding this back and just pulling through just like before. So there I've got half of them, there I've got the other half, and then here's my loop and slip stitch. So now I've started row 2, and I'm just going to keep doing that all the way across in here, 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 and then once you have a next jasmine, you'll go in the top again, the bottom, and the next. So I'll show you one more time, and then I'll meet you back to do the ending one. So chain 1 once again, lengthen loop, go in the top of this eye, 1, 2, 3, yarn over, base, 1, 2, 3, and I do find that it's a little bit harder to pull up the loops in this first one, and it can tend to sometimes be tighter here and then have longer loops here, so be careful of that, because it's just for some reason the way that your hand is positioned, it's a little bit easier to do on these ones. So just be careful that you're pulling up an even amount of loops. Not even amount, but even height is what I mean. 2, 3, hold back the strand, pull through half, pull through all. Slip stitch right in there. Okay, so there's our second one. And it looks like I have 1, 2, 3 left, and so I'll meet you back when I get to the last one. So here I just have my last jasmine stitch to do, and you can see all 5 petals are completed here, making these jasmines look so pretty. So my last one, for my last one I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to go here, here as usual, and then we're just going to find a loop to go through at the end, kind of like we did at the first row. So I already chained 1, and I'm making my first puff, 2, 3, yarn over, going in the base or the eye of this next jasmine, 1, 2, and 3, and now yarn over, and this is all about just finding the junctures, right? For this entire stitch, we're finding the little junctures of the jasmines. So right here, I'm just gonna go kind of in this end. So if you look at these petals closely, here we have the 5 petals we're making the top 2 petals of this jasmine. And this is kind of like the beginning foundation puff row we did. And so the juncture is going to be right in between those two, right here. So I'm going to insert there and make my last puff. 1, 2, 3, and hold back our loop and pull through our jasmine. And then slip stitch. Okay, and there we go. Row 2 is done. Row 3 is going to be exactly the same as row 2. We're just going to chain 1, turn, and make our little chain, turning chain or turning puff stitch in this first one, just like before. Remember, we do the 8 loops, but then we complete this puff stitch with the single crochet. And then once you do that, you're all ready to start with row 3, where you do a jasmine starting here, here, and here, and then just repeating that all the way across. So that's really all there is to making the jasmine stitch. The reason why I would say it's not the hardest stitch out there, it is tricky, like don't get me wrong, it is tricky, and it's tricky getting the loops at the right height, and it's tricky pulling through 24 loops at a time, but it's only a 1 row repeat. There's cable stitches out there that have all these crazy front posts and back posts, and you have to keep track of it, and it's super confusing. This, once you've got it down, you've got it down. So I hope that you'll just keep practicing. Once you get it, don't get discouraged if you don't get it right away. It took me a few tries to really get it down and to get the tension down. So make sure and practice, do it a few times, and then make sure to show me your projects. If you have any questions, you can comment below. And the written pattern photo tutorial, as well as a stitch dictionary full of other closed stitch patterns, all those links are available in the description. I've got lots of different things on my blog with stitch patterns and things like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love to see you around the channel more. Have a great day.